Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Erin O'Toole is out as leader of the federal Conservatives. Political reporter Brian Lilly explains what's next for the party. The Freedom Convoy in Ottawa continues. Today we hear from more people who are throwing their support behind the trucker protest. And the blockade continues at the Coots border crossing in Alberta. BCN's Angela Stewart has the latest.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Erin O'Toole has been ousted as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Of the party's 118 MPs, 73 voted him out. O'Toole faced a lot of backlash from a number of MPs within his caucus over a variety of issues, including his flip-flop on the carbon tax. On his way out, O'Toole gave his definition of conservatism today and what it means to him.
Conservatism is about a vision of the country that makes us exceptional. It feeds the soul. It causes us to aspire to be better for our country, for our communities, for our families and neighbors, and for our role as a leader on the world stage. But it is just dreaming without the lever of power that comes with inspiring the country and earning the trust of its people.
Brian Lilly is a political reporter who's been covering the story of O'Toole being ousted as CPC leader, and he joins us now from Toronto. Brian, why do you think so many Conservative MPs voted for a change in leadership?
All comes down to caucus management because, you know, when you started hearing about this, you'd hear things like, well, it's just an angry rural group that's against Erin O'Toole, or it's just the social conservatives that are against Erin O'Toole. There were not enough votes within those groups or others that they would try and float around to get to 73. And in the end, the vote was 73 against Erin O'Toole, 45 for him. You know, add all the social conservatives together and you might hit 30, maybe a little bit over, but then you've got another 43 or so who voted with them to say O'Toole's got to go. So this is about more than one issue. This is about more than the conversion therapy crew, as O'Toole's team dismissively and wrongly put it, because those comments and comments that O'Toole made last week helped push a lot of people over. You know, a former cabinet minister who sat at the cabinet table with O'Toole, who supported him in the last leadership, Jerry Ritz, he told me he was done with O'Toole when he just kept complaining and blaming everybody else, including the former Harper government. He said, you were happy to sit in it. Why did you have a conversion on the road to Trudeau's altar? So, you know, those comments, divisive as they were, annoyed a lot of people and pushed votes away from O'Toole rather than bringing them towards him in the end.
So, Brian, what is next for the Conservative Party of Canada?
Well, immediately they have to choose a successor as an interim leader. This is not to be the full-time party leader, but so, you know, tonight they're getting together and they're going to decide who will be the interim leader. You know, the next convention isn't scheduled until August 2023. We'll see if they move that up and make it earlier so that they've got a full-time leader. But if not, then the person who's chosen interim leader gets to move into Stornoway and live in beautiful government housing for quite some time. So there's a few perks with the jobs, and you also raise your profile. So that's the immediate. In the rest of the time, they've got to figure out who they are and who they want to represent them, and you know, how they want to present themselves to the public, because that's been part of the problem. A lot of people said they didn't know who Erin O'Toole was. They didn't know which version of Erin O'Toole to believe. And they want someone who they can look at and say, well, this is who they are. We trust them.
Now that Erin O'Toole is out, has talk already begun about a potential successor?
There's a long list of successors, and posted one earlier today that included everyone from front runners like Pierre Poilievre and Peter MacKay to all of the Mulrooney children, just for fun and to see, you know, who's going to kick the tires and take a look. But you know, I've heard names like Ronna Ambrose or Lisa Raitt or Stephen Harper, names from the past. They're not coming back. Lisa Raitt told me that her husband and his Alzheimer's, you know, it's just too much. She'll continue to support the party. Peter MacKay hasn't spoken at this point publicly about what he's going to do. Patrick Brown used to be a Conservative MP at the federal level. Then he was Ontario's PC leader. Now he's the mayor of Brampton. He's kicking the tires and being encouraged. Michelle Rempel's a possibility. But, you know, so those are the front runners. And then, you know, we'll see if there are any outside contenders, like we saw with Kevin O'Leary a couple of leaderships ago.
Would Prime Minister Justin Trudeau call an election right now if he thinks the Conservatives may be vulnerable?
There's always that possibility, but given that we just had one in September, I think he would face the wrath of voters. He barely got in the last time. How do you turn around and say, well, now I need another election because I didn't get the majority I wanted last time? It would be difficult for him to do that. Could he do what Jean Chrétien did and call one just after a leader's elected? Well, Stockwell Day dared Chrétien to call an election, and Chrétien said, happy to oblige, and then promptly defeated Stockwell Day. So you got to be careful what you ask for on both sides of that equation.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas released a statement today following the ousting of Aaron O'Toole as party leader. In the statement, MP Thomas said, "It is imperative that we begin immediately to rebuild. We must uphold our Conservative principles, seek to build bridges with those in the political middle, and be a voice for the millions of Canadians who are not represented by Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada." Our Ottawa crew has been covering the Freedom Convoy, where a lot of truckers are protesting the current government COVID-19 mandates. And we caught up with another trucker who's participating in the rally in our nation's capital, who explained really why he's there.
I'm here because I got grandkids, and we got to support them. We've got to change the world. And if we don't do it now, we're stuck. So we can't leave. These guys are going to stay forever. They're not leaving until things are changing. And on the news, I guess, I heard now, they're saying that we're stealing the food from the shelter.
One of the reasons I'm in this area is because we heard those reports that there's food being stolen and that people are being assaulted and abused. So we came here to find out for ourselves. And all we have found is people like you who are here when you could be making your own money, doing your own stuff, and you're not. No. You're here sitting to defend freedoms for Canadians. Yeah. And I don't know if they're lying about it, but I can't find any evidence for it. I even asked a cop who's been sitting there for 24 hours. Yeah. He said he couldn't find anything. I asked the trucker, have you seen anything? He hasn't seen anything. Have you seen anything about violence or anything along those lines?
No violence. It's been quiet. They say there's troubles, but the cops are nice. The people are nice. And I haven't seen nothing. And like I say, they give us food, people, especially on Sunday. It was unbelievable. We had so much, and so we start giving the food away because we don't want to go to waste, right? Yeah.
Ottawa remains at a standstill as big rigs remain along major roads in the downtown core. Now, many businesses have been closed since Friday, they say over safety concerns. A number of residents say they're frustrated with the demonstrators who've been protesting and honking loudly for days.
I think it's been a really tough weekend, and I think the protest group has really shown its colors. They have a right to do so. It's gone a bit beyond that. I understand that police don't want to start something. I totally understand that. And we don't want that. I mean, I've been abused on the sidewalk, and I'm not going to get fisticuffs over it because that just falls into the wrong thing.
Let's go, freedom! Let's go!
I am the owner of the Victoria Barbershop, which is in the Victoria Building, in the basement of the Victoria Building at 9 O'Connor, right across the street from the House of Commons. I originally received an email telling us that we were allowed to open if we wanted, but that was our choice. So by Thursday night, the online rhetoric was pretty crazy to start with. So I thought maybe it'd be better if I didn't open, just in case. They weren't expected to come till Saturday, but they did show up on Friday. So I'm been closed since Friday. I'm not open on weekends anyways, but regardless, it's been 3 days now that I can't go to work.
Now, a Medicine Hat barber is giving the gift of fresh buzz cuts to the truckers in Ottawa. Calvin Isaac Malton, owner of Isaac's Barbershop, will be heading to our nation's capital, where he plans to give haircuts to anyone in the Freedom Convoy who needs or wants one. Malton says he supports what the truckers are doing.
I believe in democracy, freedom, and all-encompassing facts and science that illustrates duality between our nation, that is Canada. And it's been unified so beautifully by the convoy to desecrate the segregation that has occurred. And I just, democracy. And so I want to give my gift to the truckers, make them look good, feel good, do good.
Moulton will be hitting the road tonight and plans to be in Ottawa by Saturday. His stay will be dependent on how many truckers want to get their hair done. A number of truckers here in the province who are also fighting the provincial and federal mandates have the Coots border crossing blocked. No way in or out. BCN's Angela Stewart is there. Angela, what's the latest?
Yeah, Hal. So Highway 4 going southbound just out of Milk River remains to be completely blocked off by RCMP. The only people who, to my knowledge, would be able to get through would be locals who live in the village of Coots or emergency vehicles or even media covering this story. I'm going to quickly flip you around here so you can see. Truckers are still lined up, are completely blocking the highway. And there's really no way to get through. The only ways to get through that I had found was to drive literally onto the grass in between both highways, so north and south, and then that would pop you out onto the other side. Truckers and supporters who I have tried to speak to have not wanted to give a comment, but one supporter who I did speak to told me that so far, to his knowledge, no one has been arrested, and otherwise it remains a pretty peaceful protest down here at Coots.
Are they letting any emergency vehicles through? What have you heard?
I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen any emergency vehicles getting through. The only emergency vehicles, so to speak, are the RCMP, but they aren't, from what I can see down here at the protest, they are by the scale just before coming into Coots and then by Milk River.
Thanks so much, Angela. That was BCN video journalist Angela Stewart at the trucker protest taking place near the village of Coots. Premier Jason Kenney spoke about the situation at the Coots border crossing. He's calling on Ottawa and Washington to implement the exemption for truckers once again so that they don't have to be jabbed crossing the border. Kenney says he sympathizes with the truckers.
Let me say to those vast majority of lawful protesters, I hear you. I understand the concerns and frustrations that you have. And for those opposed to the quarantine requirement for cross-border truckers, not only do I hear you, but I agree with you. And I went to Washington, D.C. to find allies to seek an exemption for the application of the quarantine requirement for cross-border truckers from both the Canadian and United States governments. And it is, however, unfortunate to see a small number of people who engaged in protests over the past few days express extreme views and embrace hateful symbols. It's also unfortunate to see a small number break the law, create a public safety hazard, and enormous inconvenience for law-abiding Canadians, including thousands of other truckers, by blocking the border at Coots.
Kenney says he's been in contact with the RCMP at the border to look at potentially taking further action to remove the trucks and make arrests to those participating in the blockade. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says when it comes to discussing the blocked border at Coots, it appears as though Premier Kenney may be delivering a bit of a mixed message.
He says on one hand that he agrees actually with the proposition that the cross-border vaccine mandate for truckers should be dropped. However, he did say that, it's time to lower the temperature for people to listen to the police and for everything to sort of calm down. Tensions running a little bit high in Coots so far as we can tell, with some of the local residents upset about it. And obviously traffic through the region pretty much shut down.
Tyler Dawson will also have more details of how the province is investing more money into getting more doctors into rural communities here in the province. That Q&A is coming up after business news. Members of the Lethbridge Police Service attended a public hearing Wednesday afternoon regarding Sergeant Jason Moulton of the LPS. He faces charges relating to the Memegate scandal that has plagued the LPS for the past year or so. The matter has now been adjourned for 3 weeks. 2 LPS constables provided evidence against Moulton in relation to the memes that were shared against upper management within the Lethbridge Police Service. Moulton pleaded not guilty last November, along with guilty pleas to 5 additional counts of misconduct. Matters have already been concluded for the 4 other officers involved. 2 constables who pleaded guilty to 2 counts of discreditable conduct and 1 count each of insubordination and neglect of duty in November 2021 were demoted within rank by 2 grades for 1 year. 2 additional constables resigned in November of 2021. 5 people have been charged and more than $1.6 million in drugs were seized following a massive drug bust spanning across a number of Western provinces. Alert and RCMP say their 18-month investigation revealed that the drug trafficking network had origins in BC's Lower Mainland, Calgary, Edmonton, Medicine Hat, Saskatoon, and Winnipeg. Outside of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine, police also confiscated 11 firearms and $82,000 in cash.
This investigation highlights the importance of the ALERT program and how tackling regional issues can have significant effects on many different communities. Our city has experienced the devastating impact caused by the opioid epidemic. Whether through large investigations like this one or smaller local files, we remain committed to continuing our efforts to identify and hold those responsible accountable for their actions for causing this community harm.
42-year-old Matthew Edwards, 27-year-old Kevin Hind, and 25-year-old Karnveer Sandhu, all of Calgary, were charged, along with 34-year-old Ada Wahid Sheikh from Fort St. John, BC. The four men face a total of 37 charges. Now, a warrant has also been issued for 40-year-old Dylan Berge of Calgary. Canadian Blood Service has put out a dire call for new and returning blood, platelets, and plasma donors to support patients during the Omicron wave. The organization says 1 in 2 people in Canada are eligible to donate blood, plasma, and platelets, but only 1 in 81 actually does donate. Donors at the Lethbridge Plasma Donor Centre are able to give plasma frequently. Men can donate every week, and women are able to donate every 2 weeks. Staff say the need is great right now.
We have seen all across Canada a very high need right now for all Canadian Blood Services products, plasma, blood, and platelets. Here in Lethbridge, the need is also very high. We have about 250 open appointments just this week and over 1,000 appointments open for the month of February. So we have seen a rise in either people canceling their appointments or having less donors here at the center. We know that we have a small group of very dedicated, generous donors here in Lethbridge, but we are hoping to bring in a lot of new donors as well.
Now, the process to give plasma takes around 45 minutes. During the past year, the centre has seen over 3,000 people come in to donate plasma. It's great to see. Black History Month kicked off at the Edmonton Legislature on Wednesday afternoon. There were a variety of guest speakers and tons of music celebrating Black culture. As Micah Quinn explains now, organizers say it's important to celebrate Black History Month, but there's still a lot of work to do to help all Black people here in our community.
Soulful music reverberated throughout the Alberta Legislature to honor Black History Month. The NDP MLA for Edmonton City Centre, David Shepherd, spoke about how Black voices have never been more prominent. But he went on to say there is still more work to do.
But behind that truth lies another, that those gains have taken years of effort to accomplish, pushing at times against strong headwinds of overt and systemic racism and discrimination, deep resistance from those who held power. And some of those challenges do continue today. According to a recent survey by Abacus Data, 76% of all Black entrepreneurs surveyed said that their race makes it harder to succeed.
Another name you might remember if you're a Calgary Stampeders fan is John Cornish. The former running back retired from the Stamps in 2015 after winning a Grey Cup with them in 2008 and 2014. Since then, he's been doing work as the board chairperson and president of the Calgary Black Chambers. The group works to help Black entrepreneurs, students, and upcoming professionals by providing them with resources like scholarships and mentoring.
We need to find ways to support the diverse peoples on their paths to join boards and win executive roles. We need more Black entrepreneurs so younger students and university students can see them succeeding and strive to imitate their success.
Cornish went on to say there needs to be more race-based data to help support marginalized communities. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
There are some Christians who believe that evangelism is just wrong. Dave Sterrett is the founder of Disruptive Truth, a ministry focusing on outreach. Dave says when it comes to evangelism, a high percentage of millennials simply don't believe in it at all.
A study done by Barna in 2019 says that out of millennials, 47% believe, who profess to be Christians, 47% believe that evangelism or proselytizing is wrong. There's this idea that to persuade someone that Christianity is true in the hope of them embracing the truth of Christ's death and resurrection and free gift of salvation, there's this idea that this is morally wrong. And so I wanted to overcome that and say that this is good news. And if Christ has forgiven us, we should be able to share that message with other people.
Dave Sterrett from Disruptive Truth Ministry will also discuss the importance of apologetics and how it really connects to evangelism. That interview is coming up later in our broadcast. Well, it was cold once again today in Lethbridge as we hovered around minus 17 degrees. But good news, a warming trend is on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. You know, it was a good day to stay bundled up in a blanket today, but fortunately, the weather is warming up. Jeanette Rocher is back with all of your weather details, including tonight's forecast and what it's going to look like for the rest of the week.
This evening, we'll see local blowing snow and overnight winds from the southwest, gusting to 50 and then 70 kilometers per hour and a low of minus 15. Thursday, mainly sunny with blowing snow in the morning and winds once again gusting to 50 and 70 k, then lightening up by noon, high of minus 6, but falling to minus 9 by afternoon. A drastic change in temperature for Friday and Saturday as we see the mercury rise again to plus 6 with a mix of sun and cloud for both days. Sunday, sunny and 9, then up to the teens for Monday with a high of 13. Tuesday, high 9 with partly cloudy skies. The average high for this time of year is 0 and the average low is minus 13. The record high for this day was 19, set back in 1962. The record low was minus 40 in 1996. The sun rose this morning at 8:03 and sunset is at 5:27 p.m., giving us daylight for 9 hours and 24 minutes today. Looking at the highs across the nation, on the west coast, cloudy with 60% chance of showers in Victoria with a high of 7 degrees, periods of rain in Vancouver with a high of 5. In Edmonton, a 60% chance of flurries is expected and a high of minus 19. Not quite as cold in Calgary tomorrow, minus 9 there, with a mix of sun and cloud. An extreme cold warning is in effect overnight tonight for both Saskatoon and Regina with a risk of frostbite and high wind chills. High of minus 19 Thursday in Saskatoon and minus 17 in Regina with a 30% chance of flurries. In Winnipeg, cold wind chills will persist through Thursday, making temperatures feel like the minus 30s and minus 40s. High of minus 22 is expected with increasing clouds. In central Canada, 2 centimeters of snow is expected in Toronto with a temperature steady near minus 4 and a 60% chance of flurries for Ottawa with a high of minus 6. Montreal will see 5 to 10 centimeters of the white stuff with a high of minus 1. In Atlantic Canada, Fredericton will see a 60% chance of showers with rain beginning late in the afternoon, fog patches, and a high of 6 degrees. Halifax will see 2 to 4 millimeters of rain, then 30% chance of flurries or drizzle and fog, and a high of 7 degrees. In Charlottetown, a high of 5 degrees is expected with a 30% chance of showers, while St. John's, Newfoundland will see sunshine and 2 degrees.
Sales of new light vehicles in Canada were up 0.6% last month to just over 94,400 units. DeRosier Auto Consultants say the seasonally adjusted annual rate of sales came in at 1.66 million. That's an improvement from the 1.45 million in November. It says vehicle shortages continue, however, due to semiconductor supply issues. DeRosier managing partner Andrew King says January is usually the lowest sales month of the year, but there's clearly still a discrepancy between market demand and supply. Major oil-producing countries are sticking with a plan to gradually restore deep cuts to oil production made during the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The alliance of OPEC members led by Saudi Arabia and non-members led by Russia agreed to add 400,000 barrels per day in March. The move comes as oil prices hover near their highest levels in 8 years, pushing up fuel costs for drivers. Fears of a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine are adding to supply concerns because Russia is a major oil producer and could be hit with sanctions by the United States and Europe. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 42 points on the day to 21,362. The Dow was up 224 points to 35,629. The S&P 500 was up 42 points to 4589. And the NASDAQ was up 71 points on the day to 14,418. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 6 cents to 88.26 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 75 cents to 5.50 U.S. Gold was up 15 cents to 18.0695 U.S. an ounce. And silver was even at 22.66 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.02 per bushel. Barley's at $9.47. Canola's at $22.82, and corn is at $10.72 per bushel. Live cattle were up 83 cents to 141.13. Feeder cattle were up 3.18 to 166.88. And lean hogs were down 80 cents to 87.35. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.90 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Erin O'Toole has been ousted as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. In a secret ballot, out of the 118 MPs who voted, 73 voted O'Toole out. The party will be naming an interim leader soon, and then the quest begins to find a new permanent party leader. Some of the names already being mentioned as a new leader of the CPC include Pierre Poilievre, Michelle Rempel-Garner, and Rona Ambrose. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney was asked his thoughts on the Coutts border blockade, and according to our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, he sent out a bit of a mixed message. Tyler will have details for us coming up after the break. Not only has the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa grabbed the world's attention, but many Albertans are watching how the blockade at the Coutts border crossing is playing out. On Tuesday, police said the blockade is illegal and have brought in restrictions. But will the truckers leave? They say they will not until the COVID-19 mandates are scrapped. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us from Edmonton. Tyler, what's the Premier saying about this blockade?
Well, it's frankly a little bit of a mixed message. I think that's fair to say. He says on one hand that he agrees actually with the proposition that the cross-border vaccine mandate for truckers should be dropped. However, he did say that, it's time to lower the temperature for people to listen to the police and for everything to sort of calm down. Tensions running a little bit high in Coutts so far as we can tell, with some of the local residents upset about it. And obviously traffic through the region pretty much shut down as far as we know. So the Premier had, some strong words, but then also sort of, maybe trying to calm things a little bit by saying, look, I hear you, I sympathize with your frustration.
Now, would the Premier consider implementing that new legislation? Do you remember the one that was passed not long ago saying that you cannot interrupt with pipelines, you can't have blockades on our railways? Well, how about a major highway, coming through the U.S.-Canada border?
That's right. And so the UCPs found themselves in a little bit of an interesting spot because, of course, they don't want to be seen as interfering in a police operation. For example, the Premier was asked on Tuesday whether or not he would consider meeting with the protesters. And he said, look, there's a police operation going on right now. I'm not going to get involved and sort of mess that up. And a similar sort of thing has happened with I think it was Bill 1, which is the bit of a mouthful, the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. And so the RCMP, in their statements about this, have cited that act, saying that this protest is unlawful because of some of those provisions, in addition to possibly other charges under maybe the criminal code or highway traffic provisions. So that act is actually very much in play here. And Doug Schweitzer, who is I think, Innovation, Jobs and Economy Minister at the moment, was asked about it earlier this week, and he said that this is exactly the sort of scenario, actually, that the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act was brought in to address. So much of, I would say, what we see the police doing and what they're going to do is probably going to be informed by that piece of legislation.
Now, Tyler, our Premier was in the United States recently talking to some of the governors about the vaccine mandate for the truckers. I mean, it expired, but then it was implemented again by the feds. Where did it actually go when Kenney talked to the governors when it comes to the truckers and this vaccine mandate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say. So he was down at sort of an annual general meeting of governors. He'd been talking on the phone, apparently, with some of the sort of border governors over the last couple weeks about this issue. And they'd said, why don't you come down and talk to some of us? So he told the media that he had, a number of sort of formal sit-downs with governors. He didn't specify who, and then a number of other conversations just sort of on the, margins of this conference. It's a little bit unclear where it goes next. He did say that some of the governors said this was the sort of thing they were going to raise with the Biden administration, because, of course, the Biden administration has a similar rule. So it's not just a Canadian law or rule, it's also an American one. So, there's sort of two governments to deal with here. So it's hard to say what will come of that. But it is, as I sort of mentioned before, a sign that the Premier does sort of agree with at least this one portion of the protest movement and has actually been actively working to achieve what some of the protesters want.
Did Premier Kenney actually talk with the Biden administration while he was in Washington about the potential of bringing back Keystone XL?
I'm sure it came up in his conversations. I don't know if they've had any direct conversations with the Biden administration about it. We do have sort of a trade mission in Washington that I'm sure is doing some of this lobbying here and there. And honestly, and we haven't heard very much about it on the federal level either, which is maybe where you'd expect some of these sort of bilateral discussions to happen. It seems like for now, though, that the pipeline is sort of dead in the water. Of course, if anyone ever decides to start it up, I mean, I don't think the link up section that needs to be completed is all that big. So it probably wouldn't take, an enormous amount of effort to get the project restarted. But of course, it's in limbo, and there's they had to dismantle portions of it and all that. So it seems like, as far as I can tell, it's sort of an Energy East situation where the idea exists, but the project itself is pretty thoroughly scrapped.
What's interesting is how the Biden administration has been asking OPEC to increase output. It's like, hey, Canada, right here, your neighbors. We've got the oil that you guys need. We've got the fuels. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on that. Now, Tyler, Premier Kenney says by the end of this month, Alberta will begin dropping some of the COVID-19 related public health measures, including the vaccine passport system.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, I have to say, because a few days ago he said by the end of March, and then on Tuesday he said sort of end of February. So let's say, generously timeline anywhere from the next 4 to 8 weeks, perhaps we might see the relaxation of some of these things. And the vaccine passport, as you say, did get a specific mention there. So the metrics aren't there yet. Hospitalization rates are still at sort of record highs. We're not through this yet, even if it perhaps feels like it for a lot of people. So nothing sort of imminent, and he was really pressed by some reporters on Tuesday about a roadmap. When is this going to happen? What is it going to look like? What are the benchmarks? And he did promise that was coming, but no, straightforward, explicit announcement of those things. And the other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that this is going to become a major political issue for him when he decides to do that. Obviously his supporters are probably going to like it. The New Democrats are going to be, screaming bloody murder about it. So once the legislature is back in session, everyone's, shouting at each other in question period. I have no doubt we're going to hear an awful lot about this in the weeks and months to come.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe was talking about it's not a matter of if, but when they're going to lift all of the mandates as well here and try and get back to normal. Moe was saying that if this is COVID, it's just something we're going to have to learn to live with. Is that kind of the same mindset with Premier Jason Kenney in the UCP?
I think that's probably fair to say. That was one of the things that they tried to do back in August, I guess it would have been, trying to move from this pandemic to endemic management. And then, of course, the whole thing was sidelined by the Delta wave, and the plan was sort of, I don't want to say scrapped, but, sidelined for the time being. But certainly I think that's the way it's going. And, it's not just Saskatchewan that's looked at opening up. Ontario opened up some of its facilities, bars and restaurants, I think, that have been closed for a considerable period of time. Earlier this week, Monday, I think. And I've been thinking about this a lot, Hal, and so I'll maybe just mention it. It's very interesting because Alberta's oddly had it easier than almost everywhere else in the country in terms of restrictions. And it doesn't feel like that, I think, for a lot of people, but it's when you look at Ontario and Quebec, it's just a completely different world,
Absolutely. My daughter works in the hospitality industry as a cook in Southern Ontario, and it's really hit her restaurant very, very hard. It's a miracle that they've actually survived to this point. Tyler, final numbers came out in regards to fundraising for both the UCP and the NDP here in Alberta, and the NDP raised around $2 million more than the UCP?
Yeah, it's shocking. Normally you would expect a Conservative Party to really out-earn a Progressive Party. And the NDP has led over a couple of quarters. And so there's been a couple other headlines about this in the last little while. But, the final numbers are pretty astonishing. A little over $6 million to the NDP and just under $4 million to the UCP. So, it's hard to say exactly what's going on there. I think we've talked about it before. The NDP has been a very effective, bullish, loud opposition party over the course of the pandemic. And Premier Jason Kenney's popularity has really gone down over the course of the pandemic. So I think if you take those two factors, it sort of makes sense that you see this discrepancy in fundraising numbers. But of course, we have an election coming up in a year and a bit, 14 months, 15 months kind of thing. So these are the sort of numbers that they start to matter at a certain point when it comes to pre-election advertising, when it comes to election advertising, when it comes to even things like how many events a party can put on, what their bus looks like, whether they can bring media along for the tour, those sorts of questions. So really, it's sort of a numbers story. It's dry on the face of it, but it really actually quite a consequential little news update when it comes to the fundraising numbers, I'd say.
Tyler, we're looking at a potential leadership review for Premier Kenney this spring. How do you think that'll play out?
It's a great question. And, it's really hard to say. The sense that I have gotten from the Kenney camp is that they're going to fight this out. There's not an obvious successor at the moment to Jason Kenney. There's, a lot of opposition. That really had a lot of steam coming into the United Conservative AGM last year that, and it's hard to say what that steam looks like, how organized this is. And of course, we also saw at the UCP AGM this attempt by some of Jason Kenney's opponents, I guess, to take over much of the UCP board, which it did not succeed. So there's all sorts of things that are at play here, what type of convention it's going to be, if it's going to be virtual, all these things that sort of matter for the on-the-ground logistics of how this might play out. But I think because of the economic news that has been reasonably good over the last little while, that Kenney's people have felt pretty good about the leadership review. And of course, going into the leadership review, which I believe is scheduled for early April, if I'm not mistaken, though I admit I'm blanking a little bit on it. The point is, restrictions are going to start lifting in lead up to this leadership review, which I think would be fair to say will take some of the steam or some of the wind out of the sails of Jason Kenney's opponents within the party.
Yeah, that might be really good timing for, like you said, Jason Kenney and the party as we head up to the next provincial election next year. Tyler, Alberta announced a new incentive program to get more doctors to come to rural areas. How much money are we talking about? How will this really work?
Yeah, I believe it's about $20 million. And so the idea is basically straight up payments to people who will go work in rural communities. So I think they're looking at about 15 doctors or 20 doctors in 15 or 20 communities that really need them. And the way it sort of works out is there's, I think, a $60,000 grant available to pay tuition costs or student loan costs, I guess, and then bonus payments between $20,000 and $40,000 to physicians who choose to go to these rural areas. This has been an issue that has been sort of percolating with the UCP for some time. A year or two ago, they'd talked, for example, about when people graduated from medical school, sort of sending them places where they were needed, sort of like how the RCMP sends people to, places all over the country that need police officers. The status of that plan, I actually don't know. But the point is they've been sort of thinking about policy options on this front for some time because, of course, it is a big issue in rural areas and small towns and frankly, some larger towns as well.
Now, some other good news. Alberta Nurses signed a new agreement with the province, Tyler. The deal, which is good until the year 2024, will see nurses receive, a 4.25% pay increase on top of other things?
This has been sort of an ongoing issue for the United Conservatives, this negotiation with the nurses, and it's been happening at sort of a very charged time, of course, as nurses have been working quite hard during the pandemic. So there's been this odd dynamic that has become a political dynamic between the New Democrats and the UCP. With regards to fighting nurses over contracts while also needing them to be working during the pandemic. So it's been sort of this strange dynamic. But yeah, that's right. The United Nurses of Alberta, which represents, I believe, about 30,000 nurses in the province, has signed this deal. So a little bit of peace, perhaps, on the labor front for the next little while, which will also, of course, matter a little bit to the budget considerations when the budget comes out in the next month or so, I would imagine.
Now, the province put in some new rules asking supervised injection sites to collect identification and health card information. Now, drug safety advocates sued the province but lost, paving the way for the rule to come into effect.
This is another really interesting one. The basic idea is that someone who goes into one of these sites would need to present ID and a health card, the idea being to sort of link them up with other health supports at a certain point. Now, sort of drug safety advocates, as you mentioned, didn't like this. They say people don't have a health card, they don't have identification, so it sort of would preclude them from accessing these sites. So they went to court, they sued, they lost, and the court basically said that yes, it's possible this will restrict access, but the evidence isn't there to sort of block the implementation of this. It was supposed to come into effect this week, Monday or Tuesday. It won't now. The UCP has actually pushed it back to April. And the reason for that has nothing to do with the court case, but it does have to do with sort of the collection of health information, like a health card number. And so there just needs to be some sort of bureaucratic changes, I guess, to sort of which providers can collect this information, get them registered or whatever in order for them to actually go ahead with this. So that rule, barring an appeal to a higher level court, the Supreme Court of Canada perhaps, which of course would take a considerable amount of time, this rule will go into effect in a couple months here.
Has the province also talked about more help when it comes to intox and detox beds to really help those who want to get off of drugs?
Well, they have over the course of their tenure in government. I don't think I could pull a specific number out or think of a super recent announcement, but that has been a large focus of theirs over the course of the course of their time in government, bringing more money in for detox and also sort of general mental health spending. What that has done on the ground, I honestly don't know, but the idea was certainly to have more of these supports available, because their idea, their philosophy very much is to try and transition people off of drugs at some point. So they've been really sort of bullish on that, which of course has caused tension between some harm reduction advocates and the government.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
A number of our viewers tend to be Christians, but if we did a survey, I wonder how many of us are actually brave enough and knowledgeable enough to share the gospel with others. Our guest today has some things to share on this. Dave Sterrett is the founder of Disruptive Truth, a ministry that prepares churches and ministries in evangelistic outreach and cultural engagement. He's also author of the book Jesus Conversations, Effective Everyday Engagement, available at disruptivetruth.com. Dave, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Hal, for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Now, please give our viewers a bit of a snapshot or an overview of what your book is really all about.
Hal, I wrote this book, Jesus Conversations, as an encouragement to primarily Christians who don't know what to say when the conversation turns to religion. And, we're in a time in which, with everything from COVID to mandates to what is the basis of your morality and where do ethics come from, there's a time in which we just struggle with conversations and how to talk about it. Well, I believe that the most important conversation that we can have is about Jesus. But often Christians will feel awkward and say, well, how do I talk about Jesus to someone who doesn't believe in the Bible, or someone who says, well, that's just true for you, but not true for me? Well, I wanted to write this book to be an encouragement to Christians, to equip Christians to know how to talk about Jesus, to give the greatest hope to people who do not believe the way we do.
Now, I understand that some people may feel that there's a lack of evangelism by Christians today. Do you think that's more about maybe people are a little uncomfortable coming out of their shell, or is it more to do with the pandemic? Can you explain why that is?
Well, I think it has to do with the ideas and the worldview that a lot of people have embraced. We have allowed our children to be indoctrinated from a very early age from our schools to believe ideas that are contrary to the gospel. And as a result, sometimes as parents, we have not done our job to equip their minds to know why to believe what they believe about religion, about God, about Jesus, about the resurrection. Second, I think our churches have embraced this kind of seeker-sensitive movement where we want to create these environments just to attract the lost. And I think in one sense, that's good that we create these environments that an unbeliever wants to attend or wants to kind of check out this experience. But what we have lacked in is discipleship. A study done by Barna in 2019 says that out of millennials, 47% who profess to be Christians, 47% believe that evangelism or proselytizing is wrong. There's this idea that to persuade someone that Christianity is true in the hope of them embracing the truth of Christ's death and resurrection and free gift of salvation, there's this idea that this is morally wrong. And so I wanted to overcome that and say that this is good news. And if Christ has forgiven us, we should be able to share that message with other people.
Dave, do you think maybe we tend to think that our neighbors and coworkers are probably not interested in knowing more about the gospel and Jesus?
Sometimes we assume that. We think that this person just is not interested. But we live and we must be reminded that the people that we work with often will never step foot in church. They may never hear our pastor, but God will allow us in our jobs. I work a full-time job in sales, and there are people that I interact with in my day-to-day interactions. I'm not a professional preacher. I do this on the side, But there are people around us all the time who do not believe the way we do. And God has called us. You know, the Great Commission, how Jesus said it was to not just to the 12 disciples, but to a whole crowd that had of other followers. And Jesus said, all authority has been given unto me. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe everything I've taught you. And so evangelism is part of that Great Commission. Evangelism, teaching, equipping. And so I believe this is something that we can all do. And so this book with Jesus Conversations, I thought in churches, if we can gather in small groups, if we can talk about this amongst a small group, I really believe that this book can equip Christians to talk about Jesus to people who do not believe the way we do.
Dave, I know some people that say, I don't know my Bible inside and out. I don't know all of the scriptures. You know, I have to feel like I'm really led by the Holy Spirit before I can reach out to people. So what do you say to those who think that they need to have all of the right answers before sharing the gospel of Jesus?
Well, we certainly know that in Scripture, Jesus used people who didn't know all the answers. When Jesus met the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, she just started with the information that she knew, and she went back to her town and they were changed. When Paul, the apostle, who was very trained intellectually, he was right in the church of Corinth, he said, hey, look, think about it, what you were when most of you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards, but God chose the foolish things to shame the wise. So I just say, pray, go, grow as you go. As we get out there and we just start conversations, we can learn along the way, and we should learn along the way. If someone asks us a question that we don't know the answer to, we can tell our friend, look, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll go get an answer. I'll go study that. Would you like to study with me? And then we can take that conversation further towards the truth.
So explain really how apologetics is important when it comes to evangelism.
Well, apologetics is a Greek word that simply means to give a defense. This is a word that is used multiple times in the New Testament. When Peter writes in 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And so when someone asks us, you know, when they ask us a question like, why do you believe in God? Or why do you believe the Bible is true? Or how can you believe that Jesus is the only way? Or how can you believe in a literal hell? When we give an answer to these questions, we're giving a defense for why we believe something is true. And Paul, he says this in Philippians chapter 1, he said, I was out defending and confirming the gospel. And so if we believe anything, say we believe something about, like my full-time job is in helping cancer patients. If I believe that a treatment is better for a particular doctor, I want to provide a peer-reviewed article. I want to provide evidence that shows that this precision medicine, this particular type of treatment is good for this particular type of cancer. And I think we have something worse in our life, and that is sin. That has separated us from God. And so there's a lot of people who don't believe in Jesus, but we can give a defense. And so I wrote this book, Jesus Conversations, to help Christians just to get started in initiating conversations and then also providing answers without even using the Bible.
I have another friend of mine who's in the media, who's not a believer, and she asked me, she says, you always say that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, that no one comes to the Father except through me. I mean, that's right from the Bible itself. She says, I don't believe that. There's got to be other ways to God outside of just Jesus. So what do you say to somebody like that?
Well, first of all, one of the things I do in this book, and I've adapted this from a book called Tactics, Greg Koch, but I've expanded, is if somebody brings in an objection, first of all, I say, well, why do you believe there's multiple paths? You can first ask that person, well, what do you mean by that? And then why do you believe that? And then you could ask also, well, what about in other areas? Or you could even bring out particular religions that you know they disagree with. So are you saying that if there's multiple paths to get to God, that you believe that the fundamental Baptist who believes that all homosexuals are going to hell, you believe that they're going to heaven? You know, you just bring in some example like that they will disagree with and see what they say. Very soon that person will start saying, well, no, I don't believe that Hitler's going to heaven. I don't believe that judgmental bigot is going to heaven. And then you can ask them, well, why do they believe that? Why do you even believe in a heaven? And so if the person who says there is no truth, one of the tools that I use in this is if someone says there is no one way, or there is no truth, you can ask them, well, is that true that there is no truth? If you affirm that all paths are equally true, does that mean that my position that differs from your position, is that equally true to your position? Very soon, this person might go back and start, contradicting themselves. The evidence of the resurrection is overwhelming. I'll provide that in the book. And if Jesus Christ did rise again from the dead, which he did historically, then he has every right to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Amen. Now, how would you define conversational evangelism, Dave?
Conversations is just being willing to take an initiation with someone. I use this acronym called SALT, S-A-L-T. You S, start a conversation. A, ask questions. L, we listen. Then T, we tell the story. We tell our own testimony. We can work on that, but we also tell the story of the gospel, which is the most important story. And so I just encourage people. I know it's hard with wearing the mask and all the things that our culture is going through, but if we can just begin by saying hi to people around us, to just start conversations and ask questions. If someone believes in something like maybe that all paths are equally true, we ask questions. Well, why do you believe that all paths are equally true? And then after we listen to them and we ask questions, we ask follow-up questions, then we can, that allows us to then tell our story. And that allows us to tell the person what Jesus has done in our life and then proclaim the greatest message, and that is the gospel.
Now, Dave, you're right that before anyone can actually receive the good news, they need to understand that there's a problem. What problem specifically? Can you explain?
Well, the problem is sin, right? In my full-time day job, I have a lot of treatment for particular cancers, lung cancer patients who have a mutation called PD-L1. But I have a treatment that I sell for that and that I help a lot of patients. But that treatment wouldn't make any sense if that cancer patient did not have that particular mutation. Well, in our lives, we have something that is worse than cancer, and that is sin. The Bible says that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. If someone says, well, I've never sinned, then we can often reflect on the 10 commandments. For example, the commandment that says, thou shalt not murder. But Jesus takes it a whole step further when he says that if any of you has been angry with his brother, he's committed murder in your heart. If someone says, well, I haven't done too much that is bad, you can ask them, well, what about the 10 commandments? Have you ever told a lie before? What about adultery? Jesus said, if anyone has looked at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery in your heart. The truth is that we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And then I train people in Jesus' conversations how to go through the Romans road. Romans 6:23 says, for the wages of sin is death. So the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. And so the good news is that even though the wage for our sin is spiritual death and physical death, God has given us good news through the gospel, through Jesus Christ.
Let's talk a bit about servant evangelism. What is that really all about?
Well, around us, there are people that we can look for opportunities to serve them. I know growing up, my father was just really good at taking an initiation to our neighbors, to shovel their driveways, to help rake their leaves, just looking around our neighbors, if they're elderly people, for opportunities to serve them. And when we serve people, that can often allow us to build a relationship of trust. And in those moments, we can proclaim the good news of the gospel. Like my parents, my mom is not the most active, outgoing evangelist. She doesn't have a theology degree. But as she was praying, she recently told me that she just kind of felt led by the Lord to bring up the trash cans of her neighbors. And as she did that, she was able to at first they didn't know who was doing it. She has some elderly neighbors and she was just bringing up the trash cans. And they were like, well, who's doing this? And soon word got out that it was my mom. And through that, my parents have been able to minister to their neighbors. And my dad who's a minister, has done some funerals, and they've been able to share the good news of Jesus in some moments.
Now, you say that sometimes we can spend a little too much time with other believers. Why do you view this as a potential problem?
Well, I think that our closest friends should be believers. Those people that we're growing with, that we're doing life together with, they should be. But there have been seasons in my life where I was, for example, I was working at a Christian school. I was in small group with other Christians. I was in a church basketball league. And most of my friends were all Christians. Now, I think we should be intentional at times, whether it's joining a fitness club or whether it's being intentional with our work, for an intentionality to build relationships with people who do not believe the way we do, to have them into our homes, to have them meet some of our Christian friends. And just by doing life, allow them to come and see what Christ has done in our lives. And so I would always encourage that our closest friends should be believers, those that we're running alongside of. And if they're not believers, if we have friends, I think most people have friends that are not Christians, we should be bold with them. If we truly love our friends, we should tell them the truth about Jesus. That's the greatest hope. That's the greatest gospel. And God will use you in your boldness. Now, it is true that you may lose some friends. And Jesus said, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we must be bold. And I think God can use you, the listeners, to win your friends to Jesus. And I would encourage you to read this book with another Christian, to talk about it, to pray for people around you who do not believe the way you do.
Dave Sterrett is the author of Jesus Conversations, Effective Everyday Engagement, available at disruptivetruth.com. Dave, thanks for joining us today from Ohio.
Thank you, Al.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.